Our presentation today is Accessibility Considerations in Open Education Projects. And I will start with some introductions. My name is Christine Zaza, and I use the pronouns she and her, and I'm the Workplace Accessibility Specialist based in Human Resources. And I'm presenting today with Stephanie Boragina, who uses the pronouns she and her, and Stephanie is an online learning consultant with the Center for Extended Learning. Also presenting today is Gitanjali Shanbag, and she uses the pronouns she and her. And Gitanjali is also an online learning consultant with the Center for Extended Learning. So this is what we'll do today. I will define a couple of important terms and provide a brief overview of accessibility legislation and guidelines. And then next, Gitanjali and Stephanie are going to describe core accessibility practices and identify tools to assist with accessibility testing. And then finally, we will leave you with a list of resources to look further into accessibility. So let's start with two important terms. First is the term accessibility. What do we mean by accessibility? Well, accessibility is defined as the degree of ease that something, for example, device, service, physical environment, and information, can be accessed, used, and enjoyed by persons with disabilities. There are two things that I'd like to point out that are worthy of note in this definition. One is that accessibility doesn't stop at access. It's not enough to be able to just access something. People need to be able to use that thing, whatever it might be, in the way that it was originally intended and designed to be used. The focus on use is so important because it's the user's experience that we always want to keep in the front of our minds. This isn't just about accessibility being a checklist that we have to fulfill. It's about creating things that can be accessed and used. And the other point that I want to bring out on in this definition is that it defines accessibility as an outcome. Some definitions of accessibility present it as a process, which is great, and it is a process, but accessibility needs to be measured, and it needs to be measured as an outcome because it is the law. A general consensus among accessibility experts is that it's not possible to be 100% accessible for 100% of people 100% of the time. And that's where accommodation comes in. Accommodation, according to the Ontario Human Rights Commission, is defined as accommodation means that you're making adjustments to policies, rules, requirements, and/or the built environment to ensure that people with code-related needs have equal opportunities, access, and benefits. And code in this definition refers to the Ontario Human Rights Code. An accommodation is necessary when something is not accessible to a person with a disability. A classic example would be an entrance to a building that has steps up to the door, and those steps pose a barrier, so that entrance would not be accessible. So you need to have a ramp because the entrance wasn't designed to be fully accessible to all people by having no steps. So just like accessibility, accommodation is the law, and accommodation is one way of being accessible. So these terms are related, but they are not synonymous. So far, I've mentioned that accessibility and accommodation are law, so we're going to take a very brief look at how legislation fits together with requirements that you will be using in designing open ed resources. In Ontario, accessibility legislation includes the Ontario Human Rights Code, often referred to as the Code, and the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, referred to commonly as AODA. The Code, Ontario Human Rights Code, sets out the duty to accommodate. This is a legal requirement to the point of undue hardship, and I'm not going to get into that right now. The AODA was introduced in 2005 with the goal of making Ontario accessible by 2025. 2025 is only 2 years away. We're not quite where we need to be with that, but we are working toward it. The AODA points directly to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2.0. And the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are a set of technical standards in the industry for web content developers. And these guidelines aim to avoid creating barriers for people with disability and other user needs. So let's take just a brief look at the section of the AODA that concerns websites. Section 14 refers to the accessible websites and web content accessibility. And this section states that all internet websites and web content must conform with WCAG 2.0 level AA with the exception of live captions and pre-recorded audio descriptions. This requirement came into law on January 1st, 2021. So it's been around for the last 2 years, and it's something that is very important when developing open resources. Okay, so let's take a very brief look at the WCAG guidelines, and this is the version 2.0. So on this slide, a table shows how the 12 guidelines are organized under 4 key principles. And I'm not going to go through all the guidelines right now, but I do want to very briefly describe the 4 main principles with the WCAG. The first one is perceivable. This means that information has to be presented in ways that can be perceived. So users need to be able to perceive the information that is being presented by some of their senses. And guidelines 1.1 to 1.4 fall under this principle. The second principle is operable. And this means that users must be able to operate the interface, and the interface can't require actions that the user is unable to perform. Guidelines 2.1 to 2.4 are housed under this principle. The third principle is understandable. This means that information and the operation of the user interface must be understandable. And people need to be able to understand how to use the platform that's being presented to them. And guidelines 3.1 to 3.3 fall under this principle. And the final principle is robust. And this means that content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a variety of user agents, whether that's an individual or assistive technologies, for example. And this is a guideline 4.1. So this also means that the technology, the website needs to be able to interact with technologies as they become developed in future years. So that's something that we're not really going to go too far into in this presentation today. Another really important part of the WCAG to highlight are the success criteria levels. And the levels are level A, level AA, and level AAA. And the accessibility legislation, the AODA, requires accessibility at the level AA. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Geetanjali, who is going to now talk about some of the core principles, the core practices, rather.
Thank you, Christine. So now I'd like to take you through the 12 core accessibility practices that you should keep in mind and consider in your open education projects. With every core guideline that we present today, we have mentioned the WCAG principle that it corresponds to on the bottom right of the slide, so you can refer to that specific guideline at your own time if you're viewing this recording once again. The first core accessibility practice is providing closed captions and transcripts for pre-recorded multimedia. Captions and transcripts are a text version of the speech and non-speech audio information needed to understand the content. Captions and transcripts provide content in written form, which is necessary for people who are deaf or who have hearing loss. These are also very helpful and widely used by people who experience technical problems with their audio, when words are hard to understand, and when a person is viewing the video in a noisy environment, for example. The best practice here is to use closed captions rather than captions that are embedded in the video. Closed captions are captions that can be hidden or shown by people watching the video. So the person watching the video has control over displaying or not displaying the captions. Talking about transcripts, we have 2 types of transcripts. We have basic transcripts that are a text version of the speech and non-speech audio information needed to understand the content. And then there are descriptive transcripts that also include text description of the visual information needed to understand the content. Descriptive transcripts are required to provide video content to people who are both deaf and blind. If you're putting your transcript on a separate page than the page that has the pre-recorded media, then one thing to ensure is to link to the link to the transcript should be placed as close to the video as possible. And same for audio files, provide the link to the transcript in close proximity to the audio file. The second core accessibility practice is to include a variety of formats or provide multiple formats. Many users may require alternatives other than text. Providing multiple formats or alternative formats will aid in providing equal access to information. For example, providing an audio version of a book or a document is more useful than a printed page to someone who may be blind or visually impaired or may be elderly or have cognitive disabilities. Another alternative format that one can provide is Braille. Combined with tactile graphics, Braille provides an easy to navigate accessible way to textbooks and other materials that are difficult to absorb in audio form. This would be especially helpful to users who are blind or visually impaired and who want to access complex information in math, science, or other STEM subjects. Providing them Braille is the best way to access large text and complex information. The third core accessibility practice is to include alternative text or alt text for images. Alternative text is a text substitute for non-text content on web pages, such as for images. Screen readers announce alternative text in place of images, helping users with visual or certain cognitive disabilities perceive the content and function of the images. If an image on a web page fails to load for some reason, or the user has logged images on a specific web page, the browser will present the alternative text instead of the image. The alternative text should be concise, accurate, and equivalent in representing the content and function represented in the image. It is strongly recommended that alt text be 125 characters or less. In addition to alt text, you may also want to consider providing an image description. An image description gives more details than the alternative text and allows someone to learn more about what is in the image that goes beyond the alt text. Alt text gives the user the most important information, while image description provides further detail. This slide shows an example of using alt text and image description. There's an image that describes the coin model of privilege. Underneath the image, we have its alt text, which concisely describes the most important information and lets readers know that the image description for the image is linked below as well. And you will also see the image description on this slide that describes the image in much more detail. I would recommend going to various web pages on the internet and to see what alternative text for images looks like. And today I want to take this opportunity to show you one way of doing this on the web. So I'll stop sharing these slides for a moment and I'll start sharing my browser and show you how to do this on the web. All right, here we go. Stephanie, I can see you on my screen. If you can give me a thumbs up to let me know that you're able to see my screen. Great, awesome. So here I have Google Chrome open with an open educational resource. The title of the resource is High Quality Online Courses, and I've just selected a specific page from this resource to show you what alt text and image description examples can look like. So on this page, there are a few images that are presented, and I'll just focus on one or two of the images on this page. The first image given here has 3 specific blocks, out of which one is highlighted, the other blocks are faded. And the reason I wanted to say this before I turn up the images is so that you can see what the alt text looks like and what the image description for that image looks like. Now, in order to view the alt text, if you ever want to go to a web page and try that out, what you can do in Google Chrome is you can go to your settings, and I'll just quickly walk you through the steps, but you should be able to find this on the internet. You can go to your settings, go to privacy and security, go to your site settings, and find images there. And there's two options. Their sites can show images and don't allow sites to show images. We'll not allow the site to show images. We'll go back to our page and we'll refresh it. So now we can see the alternative text. So as you see, the very first one talks about the image that was highlighted, which was event 6 of the design and develop phase. And if you want to learn more about the image, they have a linked image description as well. I'll just click on this to show you what the image description looks like. It opens up a PDF where the authors, let's see. Oh, sorry about that. I'll turn on the images again because I know the authors have provided the image again here. So I can show you what that looks like. So authors have provided the image once again and described the image in further detail in addition to what the alt text provided. So this is an example of what alt text looks like and the image description for the same image looks like as well. I'll stop sharing and start sharing the slides again. One moment as I navigate through. Stephanie, if you have it open and if you don't mind sharing your screen as my browser refreshes. Or share it through PowerPoint Live, whatever works for you. All right, perfect. All right, so we talked about our alternative text. We can move on to our next accessibility practice. So the fourth core practice here is to avoid using images of text. An image of text refers to when readable text is presented as an image. For example, when we take a screenshot of something, it is recognized as an image. When text that is intended to be read is presented as an image, screen readers and other assistive technologies cannot read text that's contained inside the image. Screen readers instead read the alternative text, as we talked about in the last slide. If you want a user to read the text, then it's best to put it as text instead of an image, and rather than complicating it by using alternative text added to the image. Rather than making it more complicated, again, code the text as text that a screen reader can interpret. On this slide, there is an image of the mathematical expression square root of 113, which is approximately 10.6, which is represented as an image because we took a screenshot and posted it on this page. Instead, it would have been much easier and better to code it as text. Note that this would require add-ins like MathJax or for math or science formulas. Next is to pay particular attention to colors and understand the challenges posed by colors. Color should never be used as the only visual means of conveying information or meaning. Many users with low vision or color blindness cannot distinguish differences in colors easily. Sometimes users choose to override page colors to a high contrast mode, which may also mean that the colors you have provided in your image will be lost. This slide here shows a pie chart with information regarding the percentage of full-time student enrollment by faculty. Here, if the information was just conveyed through color differences in the pie chart, users with color deficiencies may not be able to tell the difference. In addition, people using limited color or monochrome displays in browsers will also be unable to access the information. In such cases, providing the information conveyed with color through another visual means ensures user who cannot see color can still perceive the information. For example, providing the percentage of in a numerical form next to the given or corresponding pie. The second thing about using colors is to ensure proper color contrast. The visual presentation of text and images of text should have a contrast ratio of at least 4.5:1. The image that is now being presented on the slide has the words "learn by doing" superimposed on the image in white color. This, as it stands, is very difficult to read and does not meet the contrast ratio of 4.5:1. In such situations, it would be better to not superimpose the words on the image as shown on the slide now, and to ensure that the color used for the text meets the required contrast ratio. To summarize, I'm not asking you to avoid color completely. I'm just emphasizing the use of complementing colors with other visual indications. The next point here is to ensure that audio and visuals are clear. Let's start by talking about audio. For any pre-recorded audio, ensure that there is no background noise or sound. Try to use a headset or a good quality mic when you're recording. When recording audio, ensure a moderate, consistent pace and include pauses that make the audio more understandable. We've talked about this before, but I will bring it up again. When providing pre-recorded audio, provide alternate ways to convey audio content, such as offering a transcript, image, or graphic with description. Let's talk about visuals. If you're providing text and images, make sure these are not blurry. Many users will resize text up to 200%, and therefore the images need to be of good quality. When providing video presentations, ensure that all presenters are well lit. We'll now pass it on to my colleague Stephanie, who will talk about the remaining core accessibility practices.
Thanks, Gitanjali. Yeah. Okay, so the next slide, we're going to talk about the importance of providing different ways to control functionality. So we need to ensure that web content is keyboard accessible. So this means that someone can access all the material in the web page using keyboard commands alone, so without having to click anywhere. As we'll see in this video that we'll watch in a minute, this is particularly important for those users who also use screen readers. We also need to ensure that all users have enough time to read and use the content. So let's watch this video. It's of a blind user interacting with a website, and we'll see these principles in play. So I will. All right, so one thing that I think is really important to draw from that video is that how an expert user like this man uses web keyboard accessibility features is different than how we as people who are, or I'm assuming most of us are, who don't normally use these features will use the same keyboard accessibility to test our websites. So something to note is that in this Teams presentation, we're presenting our slideshow in a way that allows you to interact with the media directly. So if you're curious, here's how you could use the keyboard to play with the video on the screen. First, notice that there's a play, or I'm just going to start it back here. If we went to the beginning, you would have seen a big red play button in the middle of the screen. And so you could use your keyboard to tab. So that's what he was talking about. You tab through all the available links on the page. And so you can tab until you hit that play button, and then you can press enter to play the video. And then once it starts to play, you can hit the space bar to play the video and to pause it again. And so you can try that on your own if you'd like. Yeah, and the other thing to notice is just how fast he was going through with his screen reader. He is really trying to get as much information out of as few words as possible. So he's not even always listening to the entire link text. So I'm going to move on to the next one now. So this one is to be consistent and ensure the system and content is navigable. And so this is, again, referring back to that video where he's talking about how he's navigating through the web page using the headings, using some of the other structural features of the web page. So it's really important that we structure our web pages to use headings appropriately so that we go in a logical order. We have a heading at a level 1 at the top of the page. A level 2 is below that and contains elements which are at a level 3. We use ordered lists and unordered lists that are created automatically instead of trying to type them out using like 1 dot space first item. So we want to use the features that are available to us in our systems. So the point of this is to help users navigate, find their content, and determine where they are on a web page easily. It's to make web pages appear and operate in predictable ways. It's about making sure that we warn users in advance when they open a new window or tab. It's providing a submit button that users have to press in order for an action to occur. It's about making sure that there's always consistent navigation. So users see the same navigation elements in the same order on a page. We don't just suddenly switch up the order on them. We use labels, names, and text alternatives consistently for content that has the same functionality. So in a math course, you might have exercises, and you always call them exercises, and then a user might know, oh, this is the same type of thing I've seen before. And then also making sure that changes to the website only occur when a user is expecting the change to occur, like they're pressing a button. So the next one is about avoiding physical reactions. So in particular, one of the things we're worried about is causing seizures through flashes. So you typically aren't going to be designing flashes in a web page, but I've seen this occur when people have pulled in a video from YouTube, for example, and there are a bunch of flashes in that YouTube video to try to get users' attention. But the concern is that those flashes could provoke a seizure reaction in a user. So just be careful as you're curating resources. And also make sure that if you're designing something with an animation, for example, that if it's not critical, is there a way that users can turn off that animation? So if anyone's familiar with the University of Waterloo Strategic Plan website, you can Google that and notice that they have animations at a number of points on that page. But underneath each animation is a little toggle. And if you click that toggle, it will turn off the animations on the entire page so that anyone who doesn't want to experience those, maybe they cause nausea, they can turn those off. And then this point is about making it easy to read and digest information. And part of this is that part of accessibility is supporting those who have cognitive disabilities. And also, again, keeping in mind the blind user we saw before, he is going through websites at a very rapid pace. The more that we can help make things easy to kind of for him to absorb, the better. So some of this is making sure that we've coded the page correctly. Have we coded the page so that a user or so that a screen reader knows what language is written in? Once the screen reader knows that, it can use that language to read it aloud to a user. Are we using abbreviations? If so, let's spell them out. So here we have Center for Extended Learning, and then in parentheses CL, and then we can use CL afterwards. But we've ensured that people know what that acronym stands for. If we have a definition of an unusual term, it can be helpful to spell that out too. And then here's another aspect of this. So on the situation in the paragraph on the left, we have the same information as shown here on the right. It's just shown differently. So we took the paragraph on the left and we broke it out on the right so that we have increased white space. We have bullets to make it clear that there's a list. We're using bolding to highlight kind of important terms that are then being described afterwards. And this is being done to make it a little bit easier for people to scan through the material and quickly get a sense of what is being said in this section of text. The next point is to provide input assistance. So this is particularly useful when we have situations where users have to enter numbers or text, because there's often certain things that we don't want them entering, and we have to make sure that they know what those things are so that they can get so that they can use the activity appropriately. So in this case, see how in this y equals box space, it says number in it. So that's a clue to the user that in this box, you should be typing a number. You shouldn't be typing the word the, for example. Then if someone does type something that's unacceptable, say they type an A with their answer or something, then when they press how did I do, they should get an error message that says, hey, you did the wrong thing, or some other indication that they need to go back and correct that in order to get a response that's reasonable. So this is about making sure that the web page is set up to automatically identify the error for the user and to identify it through text, because again, you might be dealing with users who can't hear or see what's being shown, and they're relying on a screen reader. It's also important to make sure that labels or instructions ensure users know when the content requires them to input something. And sometimes this is done through coding on the page so that a user, say using a screen reader, will hear more information than a sighted user. And then if an input detector is automatically detected and suggestions for the correction are known, then providing those suggestions to the user. So for example, if you're asked for a date and you type in something else, then you might see an error message saying provide your date in this format. And that's there to help you for accessibility reasons. And then the last point is we need to make sure that systems work with each other. So for example, this is making sure that our coding is done correctly so that one system talks properly to another system. So this is particularly important when we pull in third-party media or third-party tools into, for example, our LMS sites or whatever we're building our sites in. We have to make sure that not only is each system accessible, but they talk in a way to each other that supports users of screen reader users or anyone who needs that information to go back and forth. Did I skip? Okay, Christine, go ahead.
Thanks, Stephanie. So guidelines tell us what to do to make something accessible, and human rights principles emphasize why it's important. It is important to follow human rights principles and not lose sight of the why when you're creating accessible open education resources. And one way to do that is to avoid and reduce barriers. Many barriers exist because we created them. So when you design open ed resources, it's good to not introduce barriers or create barriers for your users, and to do what you can to reduce barriers that exist because they were there in a resource that you are wanting to use. Another important point, a principle, is to design inclusively. Design inclusively means that you think about inclusivity at the start of your design stage of your project. It's not something that you can tack on at the end of a project by using an accessibility checklist or a guideline at the end. Designing inclusively means that you intentionally and proactively think about diversity and whoever is going to be your audience, who you are aiming your resource for in all stages of the development. And then finally, another principle is to favor integration over segregation. So this means that whenever possible, you choose to design something that is accessible rather than choosing something that's not accessible and then provide an accommodation when somebody requests it. going back to the building example, this would mean if you're choosing integration over segregation, you're going to design an entrance to a building that has no steps, because you want people to feel and to be integrated and not having to use something different than other people because of a specific need. Similarly, if you're building an interactive element in your open ed resources or an interactive survey, for example, you want to choose response options that are accessible by design and that don't require people to use a mouse to select, for example, a response by using a slider, which requires the use of a mouse. You want to be picking response options that can be navigated by keyboard alone so that everybody can use the same survey or whatever the learning object might be. So that's preferable to saying, I'm going to build these components, even though I know they're not accessible, but I'll provide an accommodation when people ask for it. That's not favoring integration over segregation. So whenever possible, try to design something that is accessible to all people or as many as possible is preferred. And you can actually, I can go on to the next slide. There we go. Okay, I just realized I could advance it. We're going to leave you today with some resources on, actually, no, Stephanie, you're going to talk about accessibility testing, then we'll talk about resources. Sorry.
So a few accessibility testing strategies we want to leave you with are, but first of all, you don't have to do all the accessibility testing on your own. There are a number of automated assessments that you can do using online checkers or other things that you can download. So we have some examples here, and we'll share this with you. But we've got SiteImprove, W3C Markup Validation Service, W3C CSS Validation Service, and WebIM's Wave. And so these will scan through your web content that you've developed and flag things for you to investigate further. Sometimes they will highlight things that they know are wrong. Sometimes they'll just highlight things that you should be aware of the concerns around, and you'll need to kind of check on your own. But this checks the coding of the page. It checks things like color contrast. But if you want to go beyond this automated testing, you can do some manual testing, and you can do some assistive technology user testing. And that's often best done with people who actually use assistive technologies, because they will know how they use it better than you do. I'll just quickly share how you might do a little bit of manual testing of keyboard accessibility. So I'm going to change and share a different screen for a moment. There we go. So I'll go here. So this page is our Center for Extended Learning webpage. And the first thing that is important to do for a web page is just to press the Tab key. And notice at the top, it has this Skip to Main button. That is important to include on any web page that has navigation elements that will appear to a user first. So on this page, we have a bunch of navigation elements in this top bar in black. And having this Skip to Main option means that if a user presses Enter now, they can skip right down to the first bit of content in the page without having to go through all of these links. So that was one of the things that we noticed in that video of the blind user earlier. So one thing that you can do is just tab through a page and see what order do things appear in, and make sure that it makes sense. Another thing that you will want to do is make sure that the heading structure makes sense. So again, we heard that blind user talk about navigating through a web page using headings. So I use an extension called the headings map, and it's really easy to quickly see, yeah, we've got one heading level 1, we've got heading level 2s underneath it, and they help me jump right there. And so that's also a good way of making sure that we don't have, say, a heading level 4 appearing in the wrong spot. So those are two quick ways of doing that. And we'll share our presentation again. And Christine, I will pass this over to you too.
So the last thing we wanted to share with you was is a list of accessibility resources. And the best way that we thought to do that was to provide this as a handout, which is actually linked to the session description page in the Open Education website, which is actually now put in the chat, I believe. Yeah, if you click on the link in the chat, then you'll be able to get to the page and you'll be able to download. And I'm going to just share my screen if I can. And just show you what this accessibility resources list looks like. So you've got Web Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. We've included versions 2 and 2.1 on there, as well as some other sites on the WCAG that help you with fixing problems and giving you examples and explaining more than just providing the guideline. And then there's some other resources that are available in terms of accessibility guides. University of Waterloo has some resources, and there's some other ones that are pointed here as well. We kept the list fairly short because we didn't want to overwhelm. There's so much out there, but these are really good places to start. And of course, if you need more help than this, then you can contact people who are experts in the field who might be able to help you further.